just to say I'm so delighted to be here with you, Anderson, and looking forward to our conversation.
What is, I mean, you talk about your days is a meditation practice. What does that look like for you on a, because that's something I aspire to and work toward, the idea of every moment being part of a practice, and certainly having children has helped in that in many ways. But how does that, I mean, what does that day look like? How often do you actually sit?
Okay, let's go there, you know. And I'll start with journalists asking me the question, how much do you meditate during the day? Mm-hmm. And for decades, I used to say, well, I wake up at 5 o'clock and I do kind of an hour of mindful yoga, and then I sit for maybe 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. And I've stopped responding that way because after a while, this was 30 or 40 years in, but after a while I felt like I can't answer. I mean, I honestly can't answer that question because it feels like every moment is part of the meditation practice. So having children in the house, for instance, like you got live-in Zen masters, I mean, you know, who are guaranteed to push every single one of your buttons, right? Just at the wrong moment when you didn't need your button pushed. And then that becomes the curriculum of the moment, is how am I going to be in relationship to that? So nowadays, my practice is that I wake up as early as I can. I don't need to do it at 4 anymore because the kids used to figure out how that there was awake energy in the house and find me if I was doing it at 5, and so I had to push it back to 4 on occasions. But now no kids in the house. So I have a space in my house that's devoted to yoga and meditation, and the yoga for me is a huge part of it, the mindful yoga. I mean, the first foundation, classical foundation in Buddhism is the body. Okay, and I never found, and I've done a lot of different sports and a lot of different, you know, martial arts and stuff like that. I've never found anything as powerful for myself, although Qigong and Tai Chi are very beautiful doors, and for some people that may be more effective, but for me, I've never found anything more powerful than 45 minutes, an hour of mindful hatha yoga in whatever way the body's asking for, and then I sit. And on a cushion like this. And I brought the cushion out just not to sit on it, but to just emphasize that getting your ass on the cushion, and I often do frame it that way, whether it's metaphorical or literal, is really important on an everyday basis. It's like if you're a violinist in the New York Philharmonic, right? They don't just start playing Mozart with the great Stradivarius and a great orchestra and conductor. They tune their instrument. This is the instrument, so why not tune it every single day as if you really need it tuned in order to play it the way it needs to be played?
You know, you and I were talking backstage about, I mean, this is titled, you know, The World on Fire. In a world on fire, what is the place for mindfulness? I mean, is there a place, particularly in the sort of digital world where things are moving so fast?
Yeah, well, this is a big question, and I'm no authority on it, but I do feel like the crazier the world is and the more dangerous in a certain way it is. I mean, global warming and Ukraine, we heard from my colleague Valta from Ukraine earlier in the day, and all the other places where there's wars going on, and you've been, you know, for much of your career, war correspondent, so you've been everywhere where there's been this incredible bloodletting, bloodshed, and so forth. The world actually needs more silence, more stillness, more compassion, more kindness, and it has to be embodied. And yeah, of course, it can't just be isolated to a meditation cushion. That would be outrageous. But it can be fine-tuned and deepened through the practice. And then the challenge of mindfulness in a world on fire is how do we each take it out into the world, being who we are and loving what we love. And that would be a contribution to, in some sense, extinguishing not so much the flames, but the source of the flames. And I think the source of the flames is our own unawareness.
I do think it's easy to look at the world and say the world is on fire and things are worse than ever before. I think it's something of a mistake because, in many regards, the world has always been on fire. We've had world wars.
Exactly.
We happen to see it more than any generation in the history of the world. We're aware of it more. We see instantaneously somebody gets shot on the side of a road and there's a cell phone video camera of it, and we see it and we experience it, and I think that contributes to feeling like things are worse off than ever. But in many ways, despite all the pandemic and all the challenges that we face, things have gotten better for the majority of the population around the world.
All of the metrics over the
Yes.
past 200 years, when you look at violence, when you look at disease, when you look at education of
literacy
girls,
rates.
literacy rates, everything in Muslim countries and everything, all the indicators are going in a very positive direction with a fairly steep slope. So when we use the metaphor...
And yet, I think we feel worse than, we look back and we think of this halcyon time that existed, and
well,
I'm
as
not
you
sure
say,
if it
World
did.
War II was no halcyon time, and the Civil War, I think you're hitting on something that's really important in that, very important, because the world's always been on fire. The metaphor now is like, but there's also like global warming, and it's no joke. So there's another element to the metaphor, because now we can mindfully take photographs from space and look at the glaciers, for instance, or look at the polar ice caps, and mindfully recognize, if you have any sort of brain in your head, that the ice is disappearing. And that is another element to the world being on fire that is undeniable, although some people deny it. So again, what was the antidote to this? If we can mindfully apprehend that we're losing the water supply to half of the population on planet Earth, we need to, in some sense, drink that in and then find appropriate solutions to that problem, especially for our children and grandchildren, because they're going to be inheriting a world which is going to be shaped by whether we are acutely tuned into the level of dis-ease and disease that the planet itself, in some senses.
You've talked about being analog beings in this digital world.
Yeah. Well, this is a big conversation because we're living in this social media environment, and now we've all been, we've like Zoom, we have so much digital devices, supercomputers in our pockets that are completely interconnected and everything. So there's a certain tendency, if you watch people walk down the street in New York, people are talking to themselves. They would have been arrested when I was a boy in New York City. People would walk down the street talking to themselves. People call the cops, out of compassion. Now everybody's talking to themselves, and they don't even hold the phone up anymore because everybody's like, so the digital world is doing a number on us, and it's doing a number on us in a lot of different ways, which includes algorithms that are driving us more and more, and I'm sure you've done studies on this, into different kinds of groups of outrage, where you lose touch with reality because you're just hearing the same kind of thing over and over again, and it's amplifying your outrage because that keeps you on that particular site, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Facebook or anything else. And Myanmar, the genocide in Myanmar was basically caused by Facebook, and people were pleading with Facebook to shut it down. They didn't shut it down. So we're living in this very scary time where we're moving into digital realm with super AI, generalized AI and so forth, where we don't know what we're moving into. What I like to say is, maybe before we move into a totally digital universe, we recognize that this body, this analog body of ours, is the product of 3.5 billion years of evolution, that the universe did us. Several people mentioned this earlier today, that the universe is actually creating us, and that even all our atoms, except for hydrogen and helium, came out of exploding supernova, and yet we're capable of wagging our tongues, moving the air, and ears that pick it up, and you're following the sentence. I mean, this is like unbelievable. So, and that we can feel each other's feelings, so emotion, a kind of compassion, a sense of belonging, all of these human factors. And what the meditation practice actually represents is fine-tuning that analog experience and in some sense inquiring, how deep could this go as a human being?
And you don't think we've gone as deep as we can go?
I don't think I have. I mean, I feel like, but it's not, deep's probably not the right metaphor, because it's not about deep, and it's not about achieving some special state. It's about being who you already are. But there's so many impediments and obscurations to that that we have to, in some sense, keep tuning the instrument. But I think that I know that we humans are capable of extraordinary things when we learn to touch base with our own true nature, our own beauty, our own hearts. And we're capable of the most unspeakable atrocities when we lose touch with that, and we see it all the time. So it's now, I would say, time for the planet as a whole, for the human species, Homo sapiens sapiens, which means the species that is aware and is aware that it's aware. We need to live our way into that name, because like the train is, to use another metaphor, the train is heading off the cliff with the ice, you know, the loss of the ice, the glaciers and so forth. We need to wake up to that kind of thing, and to also, one other metaphor that I use is, if you think about the body, how healthy would your liver be if it didn't get a good blood supply? Or your leg, for that matter, or any part of your body. Every cell in your body, and there are quintillion cells in your body, needs an adequate blood supply. What about human beings on Earth, the body politic? We're all cells of the one body politic. We need an adequate blood supply to be ourselves. Poverty, racism, injustice of all kind, economic injustice, prevents every single one of us members of the body politic of the planet from being healthy and whole and contributing to the larger health of the planet. So that's another metaphor for it.
You mentioned Homo sapiens. Yuval Noah Harari wrote the book *Sapiens*. He talks a lot about how there were multiple human species on the planet at the same time. Neanderthals, right. Homo sapiens are the ones who survived because he believes there was a cognitive shift that enabled them to develop language, and that we were able to develop stories and tell each other stories that allowed us to work together as a group. Right. We developed religions, politics. Neanderthals couldn't manage to organize more than 150 people, whereas Homo sapiens, through religion or politics, could, in creating countries, things like that. I feel like those stories that we tell ourselves, I just personally that I get trapped in my own narratives of, oh, I'm the person who does this, and I have this like origin story in my head, and I think we all walk around with these stories that we tell ourselves. I've found meditation helpful in trying to step back from those stories and not sort of break the constant repetition of them and the churning of them. I find them very damaging personally. And is that something do you think meditation helps with that? Is that?
Well, if you're finding it to be the case, I think you just answered your own question. Of course, it's helpful. And that's why it's actually in the classical traditions, it's called liberative. It's like it is literally restoring the real you, so to speak, the full dimensionality of who we are.
Because I think the power of knowing you can change the stories that you tell yourself for me, has been very liberating.
Yeah. And there's also the story of no story, which is another element of the meditation practices that I love stories, and so I'm not knocking our stories. but it's the attachment to the story and the reification of that story into the entire story, the entire truth, when it may just be part of the story, and it may be incredibly challenging and traumatic to, in some sense, come to terms with that piece of the story, which is my working definition of healing, is coming to terms with the story. But there's a certain way in which when you're on the cushion, metaphorically or literally, excuse me, the invitation is to be the knower of silence, where the stories may arise and pass away, different elements, pictures, or whatever, and you're attending to it. Your awareness is aware of it, but you're not caught in that story, whatever the story is. Name and form is the way they talk about it. You're attached to name or form. So, I mean, everybody projects. I mean, you're a, universally known figure, Anderson Cooper. Nobody knows who Anderson Cooper is. I mean, but everybody has a projection of who you are.
They know I'm really pale.
Yeah. and they like it, but the point is that, people project onto me, they project onto anybody who you think you are. I mean, even with our children, even with our partners. I mean, we're living in a conceptual realm that is in certain ways imprisoning. And, I mean, have you ever been told by somebody who you have deep affection for, have you ever been heard the phrase, "You never listen to me"? These are the people we love the most, and they're feeling not heard. Why is that? Because we're all caught up in our own story, and we're generating it moment by moment. We're being driven by narrative. Nothing wrong with narrative, but let's see if there's a bigger way of holding all those narratives so that they don't actually imprison us or create suffering. And I think in terms of the subject of tonight, that's the karmic assignment of us as human beings. Can we, and we don't have that much time, presumably, because of global warming. Maybe there'll be technological fixes for all of this, but I'm not a huge fan of technological fixes of everything. I do feel humanity is in its infancy, but right now it's up to us. It's our responsibility. How are we going to hold this for our children and grandchildren, the next generation or so? And what I love is that in the mindfulness world, it seems to be like a meme, like COVID, a positive meme that spreads exponentially. I mean, we would not have been having this conversation here or anywhere else on the planet in the early 1970s. Mindfulness? Never heard of it. Now you hear about it all over the place, and the reason is that, including MBSR teachers in Ukraine, and in China, and in Russia, and in everywhere else, there's something happening on the planet that I think we're all hopefully trying to contribute to, in the sense of, the metaphor would be waking up to the actuality of this moment. And I'm interested, Anderson, in just hearing more about how you actually utilize the practice in being you, in whatever ways you're alluding to it in terms of your story and the narrative and the history. But there's a certain way in which, if we're liberating ourselves, and I know you are, from the history by accommodating the actuality of it, then how do you use the practice to sort of meet the moment in its fullness?
So for me, it's changed a lot. I got to know Jon because I was doing a story for 60 Minutes about mindfulness. I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but it was 6 or 7.
It was 2014 that it showed.
Wow.
So it was like, yeah.
So in 2014, so I got to attend a retreat, which we were filming. I actually had to leave early in order.
Okay, you stayed for 24 hours at the most.
It tells you how lacking in mindfulness I was.
No, it tells you that mindfulness is not related to length of time of exposure.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I had to leave the retreat in order to go interview this guy Donald Sterling. I don't know if you remember. He owned the LA Clippers, and he'd said horribly racist things, and I had to go and do an interview with him. And it was going from this mindfulness thing to the least mindful like interaction with a human being I could have possibly.
Well, that's true flexibility. That's why we practice yoga, you know.
For me, for me, why it's important to me has changed a lot over the years, and as I've aged, it's also changed. For me, what's very important now, and what I've tried to think about and work on over the last 2 years, really in COVID times and after, is just connecting. I used to feel a certain isolation in the practice of it, which is like, oh, I would go to this spot and I would meditate, and it was this time away from everything else, and it was all about, I like Jon's thing of like this idea of dropping in. I always envision sort of like a fishing line, just with a lead weight just dropping down deep. But more and more, I felt a connection to other people through the practice of meditation, and I don't know exactly even how to describe it, but lately I did a podcast about grief and loss recently, and this idea that all of us sitting in this room have these connections, have these bonds, which we don't know each other, but everybody in this room has lost somebody that they've loved. Everybody in this room has probably gone through the possessions of a loved one and had to figure out what to throw out and what to keep, which is something I'm going through with my mom's stuff right now, my dad's stuff, and my brother's stuff, and deal with loss and grief, and the idea that we all have this connection that is the most fundamental connection that you can go, and becoming a parent, there's also this connection because suddenly it's like how straight people talk about sports with each other. It's not something I ever did or understood. Like it literally was like people speaking a foreign language, but becoming a parent, I now have something that I can speak with virtually anybody around the world with, like, oh, do you have a kid? Oh, I have a kid too. Oh, they're two. Oh, so they're the same that way. And I find loss and grief, similar thing, but it's just something that we don't speak about. So for me, the practice of meditation and mindfulness is sort of understanding and feeling a deeper connection to other people and less of a connection to the stories that I have told myself to get myself to this spot in my life. That those stories, I'm so bored of them. If I tell my origin story one more time, I'm going to scream, and the people I work with will scream because they've heard me talk about it so many times. And I don't like that origin story even. I don't even know if it's true anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure. The stories I tell, like, I'm like, did I make this story? Have I perfected this story? Because it's now a really good story.
Let me say that it's true to a degree, okay? There's no question it's true to a degree. But then the question is, how much is it coloring the open possibilities of this moment?
Yeah.
And if we let those stories completely define who we are, first of all, no one else actually knows who we are, okay? Even if you live together for 50, 60, 70 years, there's a certain way in which nobody knows who you are. But one person could possibly know who you are. And guess who that might be? You, of course. Befriend yourself. See what the potential is. And then if we do that in community, the potential is like infinite, I would say, for actually transforming the society, because the society depends on a certain kind of agreement around lawfulness, like what is allowed and what's not allowed, okay? And lawfulness actually is the kind of root meaning of the word dharma, which is where the meditative traditions, at least out of the Buddhist and South Asian and East Asian countries come from. Dharma means the way things are. Now, if we're ignorant of the way things are, even in our own head, then we can get imprisoned in our stories or in our history in a way that's, imprisoning. And if we see it, then we're already free of it, even if it keeps coming back in a certain way. You see it. And it's like in the Tibetan tradition, the meditative tradition, they speak about thoughts self-liberating. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to say, get out of here. I've seen enough of you. I've heard that story a million times. In the seeing of it, it's like, in awareness, It's like you take your finger and you touch a soap bubble. That's how diaphanous a thought is. You touch this pop, and it's pop, because no one knows what a thought is. Even though, the best neuroscientists, no idea what a thought actually is, but they completely control our lives and sometimes imprison us. So this liberative element, it's not practice for 50 years and you'll be some kind of, sort of transcendent saint. No, you are a full human being right now. The question is, can you be that knowing without the narrative? It's not the story of me being a full human being. That is really annoying. But to be who you really are and not imprisoned by your history, which is very hard work to not be imprisoned by your history, but to not reject your history. Well, that's the love affair that I'm referring to when I speak about meditative awareness.
In the last couple of years, the other thing I've really been trying to work on is, as you say, making the meditation practice a 24-hour-a-day thing. That it's not just this thing I do very early in the morning or at night or when my kid is napping. It's, and there's very pragmatic things in that I only try to monotask. I don't try to do multiple things at once. If I'm in a hotel room, I'm not eating room service and watching TV while also looking at my phone. I'm just sitting, eating.
Well, let's stop for a second. I mean, that is absolutely huge.
Well, I don't do it always. I mean, I'm trying.
Okay, no. I'm not idealizing.
I'm not here to be like, I've reached the Zen state.
I just meant that if you're even intending not to do that.
I will say it is life-changing. I walk through an airport. I'm no longer on my phone walking through an airport. I think about doing walking meditations, which I've done with you, or see the people passing by, or, whatever it is.
Be in the present moment.
Yes.
And hey, how about it if the present moment were actually complete as it is? You didn't need to check to see what was like. But the mind, you can bring mindfulness to the digital world easily. I mean, you just notice how many times you want to check your phone. And then you can ask yourself the question, who wants to check? Who is it that needs to check? Is it actually you, or is it some thought about what you might be missing, or what you said you'd do it, then you forgot? And of course, sometimes we have to check our phones, but you see, that way, you're reestablishing agency over the technology as opposed to completely being sucked into the digital universe where, there are diseases of addiction to the digital now, and, there are really enormous amount of suffering associated with that. Hey, how about we talk a little bit about parenting, if you don't mind, simply because you've become a father recently.
I have, yes.
And that's a pretty big lifestyle change.
Yeah, and also just in terms of mindfulness practice, I mean, that is, as you said, they're like little Zen masters. And I have two children, a 2.5-year-old and an 9-month-old. It's obviously extraordinary and amazing, but the presence, being present in their lives in every moment and not wanting to miss any of those moments, that has been such a blessing. And it happened at the same time as the pandemic, so I was able to find myself at home a lot more. I was able to change my work things so I don't travel as much. But just to, this afternoon, my son came home late. He was at a children's birthday party with his other dad, and, getting him ready for his nap, and just sitting with him in the dark, in the, the room, we lay in the corner of the room. For some reason, he's decided that's where he likes to hang out. And just feeling his little body on me, sitting in my lap, reading a book. I was rushed. I was tired. I was sleepy. But it was just, again, it was just the most extraordinary moment. And so to have these constant reminders of being present is such an incredible experience.
Yeah, and
also a reminder of just how much bullshit there is and just ridiculous stuff that is meaningless in my life. And suddenly everything becomes weight of, is going to some place to talk to this person worth missing 4 hours with my child?
Right. And you make different decisions
Yeah,
now.
completely.
I mean, and that's, in a sense, what life is all about. I think the more you practice, the more kind of without forcing anything to happen or being attached to outcomes, a certain kind of equanimity tends to arise where you no longer have to complete yourself by doing that thing that you needed before to identify with in order to sort of get something done that would accrue to your narrative about benefit or reputation or anything else. It's like you can modulate those decisions and say no more because you're actually saying yes to being a parent is a very big yes. So it is ultimately going to mean you have to say no to a lot of things or you'll be betraying the yes. And how many of you are parents here? And how many of you are children here? Yeah, good, okay. So there's something about lineage, that we've all come out of, I'm going to make a broad generalization here, maybe exceptions in this technological age, but we've all come out of the body of women. I cannot wrap my mind around that. Seriously, to this day, the fact that you women give birth to us all, and that the 3.5 billion years of evolution created that so that it's like happens. It's extraordinary. And yet, look what's going on in the political realm around women's bodies. Rescued for a time, but 50% of the country has a very, very different view of the women's bodies. Now, if the body really is the first foundation of mindfulness, we need to start developing laws that actually take care of the sanctity of the body and the miracle of the body. And then what about the body of the country? Same thing. We need to develop certain kind of laws, but those laws can only come out of the minds of people and the hearts of people. And as you see, the country is pretty much 50-50 divided. So
I hadn't noticed.
yeah, I'm sure you hadn't.
Excuse me.
So, we do have our work cut out for us because, if we're just talking among the people who are like into mindfulness, well, lots of luck. If we're on the Titanic, we're rearranging the deck chairs. So there's a certain way in which we need to actually get out of our own narratives about who we are and who we talk to and who we don't talk to, and actually be the love that the awareness already is. And then love doesn't have any barriers. I mean,
There's also the question of living in a world where that not everybody has the same consensus reality, which has probably always existed, but because of the digital world, it's much easier to access and live in completely different worlds.
right, when it was just 150 people that you had to live with and you depended on them for your life, the outliers were tolerated, but like everybody knew what was happening. Now, with sort of Facebook and YouTube, you can find your own digital universe, and it's a major problem. I heard one positive thing about it. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, talking on a podcast, who was saying that social media is so much in its infancy that we shouldn't give it too bad a grade, even though it's been horrible in many ways, because the technology has such a long future horizon to it that we have no idea, in the same way as in the, when they invented the first, Model T Fords, they had no idea what was coming in terms of technology in the 21st century. So in the same way.
I like the idea that you talk about, that we haven't even begun to understand our own software. We haven't even begun to understand our own bodies.
And that we really, I would say that that's a high priority for now, because We don't know how much more time we'll get because of what's going on in the digital and the, sort of artificial intelligence world. We just don't know what kind of new fires we're playing with that we haven't grokked yet. But I would say it's time for us to actually inhabit and learn to appreciate the full dimensionality of our analog being. And that's one reason I brought up the body giving birth, women's bodies giving birth to all of us. I mean, it's like, you could say, well, what's the big deal? Duh. But when you actually think about it, it's like, it's absolutely astonishing. I mean, just totally astonishing on its face.
You and I were talking about COVID and the kind of the residue. I mean, obviously, people are still dying. This is still out there. But the residue of the isolation that so many of us experienced during that time, and the fracturing of families, the loss of so many of our fellow citizens, our family members, and the breakup, just sort of people seem to kind of disappear. Friendships just sort of, in some cases, just kind of dissipated.
Yeah. How many of you have lost people to COVID? There you have it. I think it's going to take a long time for us to digest what we've been through in the past few years. I still don't know how to relate to travel, to having dinner in restaurants, to any of that. I mean, I'm trying to be sensible without being, afraid, but it's hard to know how to negotiate these kinds of things. This is really the first kind of public thing I've done in quite some time, and as you saw, I was like wearing a mask, when I wasn't on stage. I feel like, and every strata of the society has been affected differently, but the young kids, many of the young kids who most needed to be in school during certain years to develop a love of learning, for instance, or a sense of self-efficacy, of capacity to actually do stuff. To some degree, they haven't experienced that, and it's very hard to acquire it after the fact, in the same way as it's hard to acquire language unless you acquire it in a particular band of ages in a young child. So whether it's loneliness or whether it's depression or so many other things that are really in our face right now, I think that, and the Surgeon General talks about this a lot, we need to really attend to the health of the nation, the mental health of the nation, the physical health of the nation, and to, in some sense, mitigate as best we can the damage and the loss that has been experienced during the pandemic.
I do find a constant struggle of trying to quiet my mind. Just throughout the course of my day, I am caught up in a constant churn of stuff, as I think probably as everybody is. In particular with my job, there's a big churn of things and information, and even doing interviews with people, I find it, I work very hard on sort of trying to breathe through things and breathe and pause, and before conducting an interview or even in the midst of an interview, not trying to jump in immediately in order to just really listen. You've done this so long, do your thoughts churn? I mean, your thoughts do they churn at least a little less than everybody else's? I like to think you have just like a placid pool in your head.
I know. That's called a projection.
It's a hope. I'd like to get there.
That's why I was emphasizing that there's no ideal special mindful state that you work really hard practicing on the cushion and in everyday life, and then you get to that thing. It's the knowing of the being driven your knowing's already not driven, so you can attenuate it just by being that awareness. It's the same as what I was saying about anxiety or even physical pain. Okay, how many of you have something you're dealing with in your, something that you're dealing with in your body that's causing you discomfort or pain? Raise your hands up high so I can. Okay, so just to report that it's a lot of hands. Okay, so now you can bring mindfulness to like what we call physical pain, not just emotional pain, and just inquire and play with in a kind of open, spacious way, attending to the sensations. Well, I don't want to attend to the sensations. They're like unpleasant.
What does that mean, attending to the sensations?
Well, feeling the feelings in your body wherever they are most prevalent. So when I asked you to feel the sensations of breathing, could you do it? You do it instantly, right? It's like, oh yeah. And I didn't say, although some people hear it when they hear the meditation, I didn't say think about your breathing. I said pay attention to your breathing. Very different from thinking about your breathing or feel your breathing. And so we're all capable of feeling those sensations. Okay, Nelson, now let's take an unpleasant sensation, wherever it is in the body. If you're experiencing it now, bring your awareness to someplace in the body where you're experiencing something unpleasant that you'd rather not be experiencing. Maybe you're struggling with it, maybe you're not. And can you just see if you can feel the full dimensionality of the sensations? And maybe locating it in your map of the body so that you'll know exactly where it is. You probably do this automatically. And then noticing if you're having any thoughts or feelings about the sensations or about that part of the body. And not to go into this in any great detail, but how many of you noticed that you could just attend to the sensations in a different way because you were doing it intentionally? Anybody notice that? That like all of a sudden, it's not calling you, you're calling on it, and you're saying, checking in and just attending to the bare sensation. Then how many of you notice that then emotion kicks in or a thought, say, yeah, but you have no idea how much this is killing me. So raise your hands if you had any kind of thought like that. This is killing me. So the thought, this is killing me, is not actually the pain. Okay, what we would call the pain. But it is compounding the sensation so that you're more likely to call it pain. Also with emotion, what this means to me if I've injured myself and I can't do certain things and I feel like I'm not fully myself and I can't affect the world because, okay, but that's not the pain either. So when we learn to actually put the welcome mat out for the unwanted on the sensory level and bring this kind of attention to it without idealizing or trying to force anything to be a certain way, all of a sudden it kind of expands the realm of possibilities of learning to live with the unwanted. I mean, which we're all learning to live with the unwanted one level or another. That's actually healing, to learn to live with things as they are. And out of that kind of healing, it's part of a trajectory I talk about, like we learn things. Why do we go to school? We learn to go to school to learn things. But then we're learning things all the time anyway. We're learning a lot from COVID, from everything. I mean, there's nothing we're not learning from unless we're shut down and driving through moments on automatic pilot. And what happens when you learn? You grow. You're changed. You're different because you're seeing something, whether it's seeing how you are with your children, or whether you're seeing, yourself in relationship with your job or your partner. And out of that growing comes a certain kind of accommodating to the actuality of things. It's this way. And you can find a way to be in wise relationship with things as they are. That's the healing. Actually, when you do that, the biology changes so that very often things get better, but we're not doing it to force things to be better. But that's the difference between healing and curing. And then on the basis of the healing, you get transformation, because you're like a different person, because you're no longer identifying in the same way with my problems. And then that is totally transformative. And that can happen in one in-breath and one out-breath.
Can we talk about loving kindness? Because I struggle with this.
A lot of people struggle with loving kindness.
I mean, I try to be loving and kind, but as a practice, yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that. Loving kindness is a formal meditation practice. It's called metta in the Buddhist tradition. And some people love it, and some people don't feel that inclined to it. I myself prefer well, how should I put this? It took me maybe 40 years to realize that when I take my seat, metaphorically or literally on the cushion, that is a radical act of love and a radical act of sanity and a radical act of kindness. Not just to myself, but in some sense to the world, to just stop being Jon Kabat Zinn for a moment and just dropping into being without the narrative. So the loving kindness practice, for those of you who don't know, there are a lot of different ways to do it. It's based on this Metta Sutra teaching from the Buddha. And the way it's usually taught is with a series of phrases that you will say to yourself, like, may I be happy. That sounds like a good idea. May I be healthy. May I be free from harm. And may I be at peace. All wonderful. And then you expand that out. May all beings be free from inner and outer harm. May all beings be healthy in every way possible. May all be, and there's something about it that's very, very beautiful, repeating these kinds of things. Actually, the classical way was to just like not do it in stages, but just in all directions, just radiate loving kindness. Well, that's not any different from just taking a stand on your cushion. In other words, the loving kindness and mindfulness, they're the same thing. So if you don't like the contrivance of the way it's framed in generating loving kindness, just be loving and kind moment by moment, and don't, force yourself to have to accommodate to a particular kind of practice. The real loving kindness practice is the same as the real mindfulness practice or heartfulness practice. It's how you be moment by moment, and even more when the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan and you're in the presence of other human beings who are either experiencing suffering or generating suffering. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where, the final exam of loving kindness is like, I can be loving and kind except when this situation comes up or that person, pushes my buttons. So I sympathize with what you're saying about the loving kindness practice. It's really valuable to keep it up, to actually not reject what you don't feel comfortable with. And sometimes it takes going on a retreat. We haven't spoken about retreats, and you came for one that was going to be 2.5 days, but you only stayed for one. But
I came back, by the way, on my own, without cameras. Just so you know.
That's true. But
I only meditate on camera. It's really, it's not egotistical at all.
Yeah. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I want to be seen as a meditator. I don't really want to actually do the meditation.
It really ups your reputation.
Yes. I need all the help I can get.
But the fact of the matter is that I wouldn't let somebody become an MBSR teacher unless they'd sat multiple, say, 7-day retreats or 10-day retreats at least. Because how can you teach other people to be in wise relationship with their own mind if you can't sit with your own mind for a stretch of 10 days? And believe me, you try sitting with your own mind without any distractions for a stretch of 10 days, it's going to be a real illuminating education. How many of you have sat and do sit extended retreats like that? Raise your hands. So that's beautiful. And again, it's a cultural shift that's happening more and more with each generation, but it's a very important part of it. And you give up all your devices when you do it too. So that means like you really are in the analog space with just yourself. And that's where you can actually befriend what we were speaking about earlier as your you underneath your name, your age, all your descriptors, the narratives that you project about, who you are. And then you get to actually befriend the actuality of who you be. And people misunderstand it sometimes when I talk about it as a love affair because immediately narcissism comes up. It's like, oh, I think I'm so terrific. This has got nothing to do with narcissism. This is a love affair with the world. And that we're one small cell in the entire body of the universe, really, never mind world. So I feel like there are lots of things practices that we don't really take to. Different people are drawn to different practices at different times of their lives. The important thing is they're all different doors as far as I can see into the same room. And the important thing is, doesn't matter which door you come into, the important thing is get in the room. And then learn that the real room is here, so you can't leave home without it. It goes with you everywhere. As the poet said, like a shadow or a friend. Naomi Shihab Nye, I think, in the poem Kindness. Ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. And it's only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world. Kindness, so loving kindness. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world and says, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. So the whole poem is called Kindness, and it's really worth reading. It's very beautiful.
I think when I open it up a little bit to questions from you, there is a microphone here. If some people don't feel comfortable getting here, if you want to we could try just even asking a question from your seat, and if I can repeat it to the audience if they don't. But if
but feel free to come up to this microphone here. Yeah. There seem to be two, but I don't know if that one's live. But if you want to ask a question, and because of the hour and the fact that what we said about narratives and stories is true, please don't start with when my father and mother first met. Try to see if you can directly come to the point in one sentence. Oh, is that it? Okay.
Yeah, hi. Anderson, I wanted to direct this to you. I've been listening to your podcast, and it's been it's really beautiful and wonderful, and the honesty and openness that you are demonstrating tonight is also what you bring to that. And
can you hear, by the way? Why don't you raise that up a little bit? Just point it up, or raise it up, or take it out of. Yeah, there you go.
How's that?
Talk right into it.
So so I've been listening. My wife and I have been listening to your podcast, and it's been really meaningful to us. And I won't go into that, but in the podcast, you actually, that I've heard, you don't talk about your mindfulness practice. And I wanted to ask you about how those intersect, because to me, grief is sort of the harshest teacher of impermanence, and that's sort of the ground of meditation, and they do intersect. But I just wonder, for you, living with grief, or how does your practice, how is it involved in the way you live with grief?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for listening. And I'm whatever has brought you to the podcast, I'm sorry for the loss that has brought you there. Sorry. I don't. I think I have not really incorporated the two in my mind, and I think that's a sign of my sort of the early stages of my actually dealing with the sadness I feel. Even talking about it, my voice cracks for some reason. I can't stop it. So for me, doing this podcast, which I started going through my mom's things after she died, and in doing that, I was going through my father's things and my brother who died by suicide in front of my mom. And these are all things I didn't really deal with ever. And I, very much from the time, excuse me, my dad died when I was 10, just propel myself forward. And I was very much about propelling myself forward. And so doing the podcast was in a weird way tricking myself into actually dealing with grief, because it was work. So that's something I've always poured myself into. And yet I was able to, it has fundamentally opened me up in ways that I'm still figuring out. And I think the practice of mindfulness that I've been trying over the years has prepared me for it and sort of enabled me to sit with it and sit with the sadness and these feelings and allow myself to kind of feel them, which I've never before. So, that's.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Mr. Kabat Zinn, I wanted to thank you. Your books have helped me so much with my anxiety, to not run away with it, but to embrace it. I'm gonna get emotional.
I can't be the only one, so thank
No.
you.
Mr. Cooper, 20 years ago, I fell in love with your reporting. I love the integrity, the honesty, and the courage with the stories that you tell people. And when I didn't think I could love you anymore, you did this podcast. And my father passed away at the age of 42 of a heart attack. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of my brother, who also passed away. So this isn't a question. I just wanted to thank you. I love you very much. Congratulations on the birth of your beautiful babies. And just know
Notice that thought arising in the mind, and then just let it go.
I missed that.
She said, "Can we all get one?" And I said, "Notice that thought arising in the mind."
It's hard to top. I'm sorry.
I know this is not the best time to come with my question. Jon, thank you so much. I came from your retreat at Omega, and now I'm walking down the streets of New York, slowly, looking up at the buildings, at the rooftops, because I would never do that, rush, rush, rush all the time. What I wanted to ask Anderson, is there any possible way, first of all, I am madly in love with CNN. I watch it. Like I am.
You're the one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am like addicted. Okay. Honestly, I am addicted to CNN. I'm watching you all the time. Okay. I love it. It's wonderful.
I recommend expanding your horizons a
I know.
little bit. Just,
However, what's happening is it's giving me a lot of anxiety, okay? So watching CNN is very anxiety provoking, okay? So I'm like addicted to I love the way you do everything, but the actual content is extremely anxiety provoking, okay?
I understand that.
So here we are watching the show, watching you guys, love it, and getting like freaked out
Sure.
because you're always talking about things that are so awful,
Right,
okay?
yeah.
Yes.
Stuff that's happening. I know.
Exactly. So my question is there any way that we, the people,
Yeah.
can have any influence
Yes.
on what you guys put on the news? So in
There-
other words,
so, okay. So actually, I totally get it. I
Okay.
know what you're saying,
Yeah.
and you and I actually discussed this. That people always say, I want to see. I want there to be more positive stories out there, and I want to see all of that. And I totally understand that, and I love that. I can tell you, you will not watch it, and I can tell you. Maybe you will, because you like, but most people do not watch positive stories. And
but what if you had a segment that
no, I'm
just...
telling you,
Okay.
if you have a segment, I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm
Okay.
just telling you, we all think we all want to see stuff that's positive. In reality, we all have a negativity bias. That's so.
Yeah,
you know,
but how are we going to
so-
change that unless we change it?
I agree. And there are those positive stories out there, and one can focus on them and pay attention to them, but they do not. It is very difficult, when democracy is at stake, or there are the world is on fire, or there's the war in Ukraine. It's difficult to have in any one program something that encompasses the full, positive things that are happening also. And maybe I'm making excuses, and maybe
No, I don't think so. I think, CNN is part of the, capitalist media empire, and it's driven by those kinds of factors. At the same time, you have people like Anderson delivering the news, and you're watching. And so why don't you turn that into its own meditation? And instead of putting it on CNN, which the likelihood of CNN all of a sudden becoming more benevolent in the ways you're hoping to, but what about if you became a little bit more benevolent and took all that energy, stopped watching CNN so much, and did one thing, just one thing, that contributed to the world become kinder? And I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm talking about all of us.
No,
That's
I
why
know.
we're here.
No, I know. That's
Yeah.
exactly. No, I agree with you 100%. But I'm just saying, I know that I do watch you, and I love the way you present everything.
Yeah,
so
no, I
I just
agree.
wish
Yeah.
that I could hear something.
you.
That's all.
I hear
That's
you.
it. Yeah, I know you know.
We discussed that. Yes, I hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other thing is that there is a way in which you can bring awareness to watching CNN. You can be mindful of how difficult it is for you, or how toxic, or how overwhelming. And at a certain point, you can actually decide to watch less CNN and turn that into
Now,
a
I really don't think
meditation
we should go
practice.
that far. I mean,
Just watch Anderson,
thanks, JKZ. Appreciate that.
Just watch Anderson. But again, it's always titrating, because if it wasn't CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whatever it is, it'd be something else. I mean, we're constantly driven to distract ourselves. And we're living in a world where people are paid enormous salaries to figure out how to get inside your head so that you will go with whatever their thing is. And that's what the algorithms are more and more driving us to: engagement, eyeballs on the screen forever.
I do think it's also important to be a mindful viewer of any content, and to be aware of what the market forces of some internet site is, that why the headline is full of outrage and this person did this to somebody else, and then you click on the article and it's actually, it wasn't so exciting or dramatic, the actual content, and you look at some of these websites that have very incendiary headlines that make you click on it. I think it's important as viewers of content to be aware of, who's giving the information, how it's being, how it makes you feel, and to be aware that, not any one thing. I mean, I get people saying all the time, you should do more international news. CNN has an entire international network devoted to nothing but international news, and not a lot of people watch it. I watch it all the time, and I do believe in doing lots of international stuff. But, the information is out there. It's just a question of where you choose to find it, I guess. So, anyway, thank you. Yes?
Thank you.
John, I have a question for you, and I want to go back to the theme of today about the world on fire. And I think one of the, and this really kind of follows up to some of what you're saying, but one of the things that makes the world on fire right now is this just incredible epidemic of anxiety and depression, which was just only exacerbated by COVID. And I'm just curious your thoughts about the recent, the news that just came out about equating people going through the 8-week MBSR with taking the dose of Lexapro. And I'm wondering if this is going to be a watershed moment, and if you think this is going to have any tipping of the scale towards insurance coverage and things like that.
Well, let's take a kind of quick poll. How many of you even know what he just said? That you're aware of that? Okay. This is a very special audience, because a study was just published out of Georgetown University showing that MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, an 8-week program for medical patients or people with various kinds of diagnoses, was as useful as the premier drug for treating anxiety in a very highly well-designed clinical trial. Now, that has been also shown for mindfulness-based cognitive therapy in the case of major depressive disorder. If you combine the number of people on the planet who have anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder, it's gigantic. There are no other categories of disease on the physical side or the psychological side that have those kinds of numbers. And mindfulness has now been demonstrated by randomized clinical trials to have as much of an effect as the drugs, okay? Now the drug companies, they're like multi-billion dollar organizations. Mindfulness is like, sort of grassroots. I mean, it's just like, it's roots, it's coming up through the earth. And I love that there's no leader, there's no capitalism.
You don't even have to buy a mat.
You don't even have to buy a mat or a cushion. And so this is, I would say, diagnostic, if you'll pardon my putting it that way, of what I was kind of implying before, that there is a lot of potential for us to actually live our way into, perhaps for the first time, speaking evolutionarily, the name we gave ourselves, as Linnaeus gave us as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, which comes from the Latin sapere, which actually means to taste. Now, if I gave you like a 20-slide PowerPoint of the chemistry of a strawberry, would you know what a strawberry was as much as if I just gave you a strawberry and you ate it? Obviously not, right? So to taste means a certain kind of direct knowing, okay? That applies to everything. It's like, it applies to your children. It applies to your job. It applies to the present moment. So if we can reclaim or live our way into, for the first time, the name we gave ourselves as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, which is a double dose of sapere. So it's not just awareness, but it's awareness of our awareness, which is really what's called meta-awareness in the cognitive psychology world. But that allows us to actually navigate without being caught in the narratives that drive so much of our life and that drive so much of our emotional reactivity. So I would say that the more we have these kinds of conferences, the more we participate in these kinds of dialogues, the more we practice together, and the more we actually go on retreats that we don't think we could do, and then see, sort of like a certain kind of measure of your motivation to actually reclaim who you are by sitting with yourself or walking with yourself for 10 days or something like that, And there have never been more wonderful mindfulness teachers out there on the planet than there are at this particular moment. So there are many, many different opportunities and doors into this room. And I would urge all of you to kind of just make that a part of your every yearly life, to go on retreat at least once a year or whatever you can do, given your responsibilities and so forth, so that you're actually tuning your instrument and becoming more of an instrument of transformation and making use of the science that's demonstrating this stuff is not just bullshit, because it's being, sort of shown in clinical trials to be, have major effects on real human beings with real medical diagnoses and psychiatric diagnoses. This may be the way in which we attend to the fire of the world in such a way that it doesn't wind up burning us, but we use it intelligently, just the way we discovered that we could control fire back in the day, so that we can basically make the world safe for not just our life forms and our children and grandchildren going, but really all life forms. Now, if we just, heat up the planet, so who knows what will happen? The cockroaches are going to just have a field day no matter what. So, and many other insects probably as well. But if we care about Homo sapiens sapiens, then this is it's a radical act of sanity to both drop into the present moment on the cushion, metaphorically speaking, and also drop into the stream of activity in a way that only you can contribute to, that nobody else on the planet has your particular karmic assignment. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to ask yourself, what is my true karmic assignment? And then trust it and see what unfolds. And we'll be watching too, because we're in this together. I mean, and where we are now was completely unpredictable from where we were, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I mean, you're a different person in some ways. Same old, but also not. Well, what is the potential here for true learning, growing, healing, and transformation across the lifespan? And you only get until you die. And being 78, I mean, I woke up one day and I realized I wasn't 28. I mean, seriously. I mean, Navarre and I went and sat in the park, Washington Square Park. So there's 50 years difference between us or more. And I realized, hey, I'm out of here. I'm on my way out, I'm going to try to stretch it out as long as possible, And there's the interesting thing about dying is there are an infinite number of moments between now, where we're all here together, and when each one of us is going to die. To a first approximation, there are an infinite number of moments. And you don't get any more after that, at least in my, sort of first approximation assessment. How many of those moments are actually going to be met, lived, inhabited, and brought to the fore, not for me, but for we, okay, for us together? And that would be the challenge, and that's why it's a love affair, and that's why, you say, well, with the world on fire, what good is meditating? And that's absurd. That may be the only thing that restores Homo sapiens to its true potential.
Another question here.
Hi. Great. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I just wanted to say that it's amazing to be here with my two heroes, because the both of you single-handedly got me through 2020. So I appreciate that. That last question, you pretty much answered it, but I wanted to say that I'm very fortunate that I was introduced to meditation and mindfulness as a child. But it's changed over the years, because it used to be like this kind of dirty little secret. Like you'd say, I meditate, and people would think you were, crazy, like part of a cult or something. Mm-hmm. But now mindfulness it's luckily, it's, like you said, it's catching. Everyone knows the term mindfulness and meditation, and that's a great thing. But as a mindfulness practitioner and as an educator, I feel like I could be doing more. How do I, and Anderson, you talked about, and you both talked about, moving it from the cushion and bringing it out into the world. And to do that ourselves is a challenge, to be mindful on a moment-to-moment basis and on a daily basis. But how do we get others to realize what mindfulness really is? And it's not just being on the cushion. That's, like you said, that's the practice, that's the fine-tuning. But how do we get people to understand it's what we do out there in the world, in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah.
I would say that the most infectious way to affect that, and I'm using infectious like the meme, that things spread just the way COVID spread, is to not emphasize the doing, but emphasize and remind yourself of the being. Because in a sense, when the doing comes out of being, it's an entirely different kind of doing. And so there's no real dualism here. Mindfulness is non-dual practice, not this or that. There's the instrumental and there's the non-instrumental. That's why they say in the sort of Prajnaparamita Chan tradition, the Chinese Zen tradition, no place to go, nothing to do, and nothing to attain. Why? Because you're already whole, W-H-O-L-E, and that's true at the level of physical health. It's true at the level of mental health. No matter what's wrong with you, there's more right with you than wrong with you. We say that all the time to people who come to the MBSR clinic, and they come with every conceivable horrible diagnosis in the world. But we say, well, as long as you're breathing, there's still more right with you than wrong with you. So yes, it's very important to keep asking the question, almost like a Zen koan. What is my job on the planet with a capital J? And that, for me, the way I describe it is, what would I love so much I'd pay to do it? Okay? And it could be sweat equity. It could be coming out of your bones, out of your skin, out of your pores. But what would I love so much? And what do I think is so important? I'll pay to do it, at least long enough until I figure out how someone else can pay me to do it. But if every single one of us asked ourselves that in our own space, not having to change and become somebody else, but be who you really, really, really are, then that's part of the love affair. How many people love their work? But if this were your work, you'd love it. And you'd see that it wasn't about you and how great you were doing the work. It's about the effect that it has on other people and on the world. And that's where I think the hope lies.
It's great to see the perception changing and more people understanding it and trying it.
Yeah, we also have to be careful not to get too self-congratulatory or think, all of a sudden the world's going to become more... Greed, hatred, and delusion are having a field day nowadays. And not just in other people or in corporate America, but or in Russia, or China. Greed, hatred, and delusion, you sit down on the cushion and you discover, hey, that's inside me. I'm like pushing away what I don't want, pursuing what I want. You know what that's called? It's called greed. So we work on our own, and then all of a sudden we're much more effective in the world because we recognize it. We don't have to eradicate it. You see, that's part of being human, is like, I want, me, me, me. And the same with hatred, what I don't want, push away. It's like totally unbalanced, pursuing what I want, getting rid of, and then you die. Not good to die like this. Die more like this. And if you die, because each out-breath, this is a fun thing to think about. Each out-breath, like if the next in-breath didn't come, where would you be? And so if I ask you, how many of you are breathing? Raise your hands. How many of you are breathing, if you're answering that question? Okay. The fact is that if it were up to you to be breathing, you're not breathing. If it were up to you to be breathing, you would have died a long time ago. You got a text, you got some kind of phone call, thought about like, what do I have to check now? And, whoops, dead. So the phrenic nerve and the brainstem and the diaphragm, they don't let you anywhere near the actual breathing process. Yes, you can hold your breath, you can force the breath in and out, but you're not doing the breathing because it happens during sleep, during whatever. So who are you then? Who's being breathed? Who's thinking? You don't know what a thought is or how to think, or who are we? And when you ask that non-dual question and you don't fill it up with dime store answers, then you've got a revolution worthy of the task at hand, I think, that we're facing as a human species. And it takes absolutely every one of us, all hands on deck moment on Spaceship Earth, not just for COVID, but for all of the ways in which greed, hatred, and delusion are now becoming so problematic that we have to actually find new ways of lawfully mitigating those viruses.
That just blew my mind. I don't know who's breathing for me. Like, I like that. That's a great, yeah, who is this?
It's very liberating,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah, it's like, hey, but you're happy that you're breathing, right? You're happy that you're
Yeah.
being breathed or whatever.
But I mean, the challenge of trying to understand who's doing
Yeah, but
this.
you can do that with the eyes. Like, can you believe we're all sitting in a different room? Well, you're sitting in your chair. I'm saying we have different light entering our eyes in totally different ways, every single one of us. And yet we're capable as humans of being in a consensus reality that we're all agreed that we're all in the same room, even though our brains are computing different rooms. And nobody's actually seeing the room. You're seeing what the brain is constructing because the body's sitting in the space here. It's unreal, but it's also very real. So the human beings, we are just incredibly miraculous beings, real incredible mysteries. And that's why, how many of you practice yoga? Or use the word namaste, okay? I mean, like, you see people with their yoga mats and stuff like that. The namaste. What does namaste mean? You know what it means. It means I bow to the infinite beauty within you, okay? That's like, very different from put it there, partner, And, it's like I'm actually acknowledging your intrinsic miraculous beauty of being. And how somebody mentioned the word, it's really important. Impermanent it all is. It's impermanent, and no one knows when it's going to come to an end, when you will breathe out and there will not be another in-breath. It's going to happen for every single one of us, and it's happened in time all the way back, and with animals too. It's not just us, so we can't take it personally. But how many people out there in the world actually appreciate this one, which is the only one that's ever important to us? If you're drowning, you don't care about the next breath. You only want this breath, and you'll do anything to get the next breath, this breath. And so it doesn't take that much to actually live that love affair, to live with the appreciation of it. And then when you wake up in the morning and you see your children, it's like, live in Zen masters, live in Buddhas, live in miraculous beings. And so if we ever forget, or we get annoyed because like they woke up and they shouldn't have, or they did this and the mind says they shouldn't have, then you get the opportunity to, ask yourself, who says? This, if it's arising, it's the curriculum, okay? Maybe it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you want to get some sleep and kid wakes up. You thought that the curriculum was that they were going to sleep and you were going to sleep, but that's not the curriculum. Why? Because that's not what happened. So you see, it's actually a really very lawful way to unfold as long as we don't build personal stories of liking and disliking around it that are too tightly constrained.
Thank you both. Thank you for
Thank you.
everything.
How are we doing as far as you're
I think
concerned?
well, yeah, I think
Are you?
time-wise, I know we've gone over, so I think we need to wrap it up. Do you want to take one more question, or do you have some final thoughts you want to, John, how do you feel?
Let's take one more question.
Okay.
It's a privilege to be able to ask this question. I feel like I've come here to have affirmation of my, would you say, karmic assignment, because what I do is help people declutter through grief. That's my business. And so just hearing the stories is
Did you use the word declutter?
Declutter. I'm one of Marie Kondo's first English-speaking instructors outside of Japan, and I'm a social worker by training. But I just wanted to offer that as gratitude for the affirmation. But the question is really about, for those of us who do have a mindfulness practice, and I do feel like in the moments of chaos, I can transcend it and be present and still. But the discernment between that and disassociation and spiritual bypassing, I sometimes feel and get feedback, you should be angrier, you should be more upset, you should be falling apart, and you're not. And I'm wondering what's numbness and what's full aliveness. So when I can feel everything, it's
When people say that to you, does it strike you as true?
Sometimes I try to.
Or is that their opinion, and and in your own experience, you're not as deluded as they're saying you are?
I feel like I'm true, and I can feel the full spectrum of feelings. So in taking the love letters, I'm going through a grieving of a breakup, and I'm decluttering and taking the love letters off the wall and figuring out, do they belong in the trash? Do they belong in the bin for a little while? What's the feeling? Can I hold that sadness with the truth that this was a deeply beautiful, healing relationship at the same time? Do I, so that just if I can feel it all, I think I'm doing it right.
Well, first of all, just what a beautiful sharing with us of something that you're going through that's obviously extremely meaningful to you and brings back aspects of a life lived, right? Mm-hmm. With the full spectrum of emotion. And how many of you resonate with that? How many? This is part of our kind of, the way we are is like, there's the history, and then there's the loss and the regrets, and then there's also the openness of possibility. Emily Dickinson said, I dwell in possibility. What's the next line? A truer house than prose. So as long as you are bringing awareness to what you're going through, I would say you can't go wrong. You trust in the practice and let it be as it is. And then if people have their own opinions about who you are and what you are, frankly, they don't know you all that well, no matter how close they are to you, because no one can know anybody that well, and what a letter from the past might mean to you. It's just not possible. And you don't know what it means to you either, but there's a certain richness there, and then maybe you'll burn it. And then maybe you'll regret that you burned it. And it's
Those
all
are
part
called
of...
KonMari casualties in the
What's
business.
that?
They're called KonMari casualties in the
Okay,
business.
well, it's all
Yeah.
part of the curriculum, and there's no one right way to practice that. You'll learn in the unfolding of it, as long as you're willing to make it all part of the practice, and to see how whatever the feelings are that arise, they're feelings. And then there's the knowing of the feelings. There's awareness, not thinking about the feelings, but the awareness of the feelings. And that is compassion. There's no separation between awareness and compassion. But my saying it doesn't help that much. I mean, that's the kind of experience it in moments when it might be more likely to become apparent to you that's the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to
No,
that some more?
I'm not qualified to.
No.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And Jon, thank you.
Oh, Anderson, it's always a pleasure to connect in this way and to be part of some kind of mysterious adventure that really has so much heart associated with it. You know, we'll, you know, I see you a lot more than you see me, but I look forward to the next time our paths cross in the flesh.
Me too.
Okay, so deep bow
Thank you very much.
to all of you, and thank you. So, and where is Soren? Is Soren around? Yeah, so
I think we're going to call.
we gotta come here in between us.
Oh,
We gotta get in between us. So
What do you want us to do, Jon?
I
always tell
just
people
wanna-
you're really in charge.
yeah,
Just so
well,
you know,
this is a
I'm
kind
in your
of, there's no
service.
end to delusion. But I just want to say that none of this would have happened without Soren. Soren just is a remarkable convener and being in your own right. And I just wanted to, in public, thank you for this offering. And I hope that it spreads exponentially in the world.
Great, thank you. The secret is I email Anderson. I'm like, Anderson, do you want to interview Jon? And I email Jon, say, Jon, do you want to have a conversation with Anderson? And you both say yes. And then, and I trust something beautiful will happen.
Hey.
I just want to say the work with the grief work, Anderson, that I've just been able to tap into a little bit. It's so sweet to see you come out, in my imagination, you come out more with the things that really matter to you, and to feel the response from people is like, it's really beautiful to witness that has so much resonance with so many people, and it's also part of your own healing.
Yeah.
And our healing is like joined. Yeah. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna go away and do my healing. It's like, no, my healing is their healing too. So I just want to say how sweet it is to see that emergence in you. Yeah.